They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking,
hi, this is Nico. You're listening to my dad Rafal, also known as the White Rabbit, and James Jardine on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Buckle up and enjoy.
deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
Oh, goody gumdrops. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to a lovely edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast, where we're going to tackle the topic that a couple of us have, I don't want to say ranted on, but maybe rant's a good word. We've expressed some opinions on. And to that end, I have a returning guest. Eric, I think I need to send you I've been on this podcast a bunch of times and all I got was his dumb t-shirt.
It's going to be a jacket. Whatever.
What's that? You get a jacket?
It's going to be a jacket.
That might be a little past my budget. So Eric, welcome back to the show. And we have today with us the one, the only, I hope you're the only, because if there's another one, then I'm really in trouble. Mr. Lee Kushner, how are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm excited to be on today.
Hey, tell us a little bit about you, because everybody knows everybody else on this podcast. Tell us what you do and who you are.
Well, I mean, I've been recruiting in this industry, I guess when it used to be called information security. And for about 20 plus years, I ran an executive search firm, a retained firm, where we found anything from CISOs to technical security folks, all up and down the ladder. And I sold the business close to 5 years ago, and have been kind of just monitoring what's happening in the world of employment from the sidelines. And it's definitely an interesting view, and a lot has changed in a very short period of time. And it thinks like the world's a little bit upside down right now.
Yeah. Upside down is a good place to put it. And we've got James and Jim. Welcome back, boys. I know you guys have some opinions. All right, let's dive right in. The news for the last several years was there is a massive talent gap. Everybody should get into cyber. We have 10 billion open jobs that are not filled. And it turns out, as our friend Ira pointed out, that may not be so true. Who wants to jump on this first? Because I'll keep my rants to a minimum. I work here.
I can take a stab at it here, Raph.
Stab away.
Here. Yeah, stab. Like literally, give me a knife. This is something I've seen. Being on the leadership side of things. Trying to get look on here. As I've tried to hire teams, I've seen, both from the company side how they're pulling back on hiring or actually having layoffs in a lot of places, to the impact it's having, like people in my network who have been unemployed for quite a long time, and all these people that are out there are asking kind of the same question, like, where are these jobs? Where are these supposed jobs that are all going unfulfilled or unfilled? When we're seeing, the salaries starting to decrease across the board, because, especially in mid and lower level roles, we're seeing more outsourcing of roles to Asia, Philippines, India, or whatnot. And we actually have data, hard data around this that Ira, shared in his blog post the other day, which hopefully we can put a link to here in the show notes, the short runners. We basically say, look, over the last year, we've seen almost a net loss of 60,000, cybersecurity roles in North America and Europe. And we've seen those roles get migrated to, a net plus about 60,000 jobs in, India, Philippines, Asia or whatnot, where we're kind of outsourcing a lot of these roles. And so we're not seeing, an increase in hiring. I think the numbers that he quoted was like a 0.8% increase in cybersecurity roles over the last year. And that's after, we've seen this mass migration of roles from, kind of Western countries to Eastern ones, where the workforce is cheaper. And so like the real life data just isn't reflecting that there's this massive gap. And then I don't think you need, hard data to kind of see the job market and the way it is today. Even LinkedIn's own numbers, on the greater job market is showing that I think they reported half of the jobs that get posted on their own website, no one's hiring for. The people are posting them to try to like at a startup trying to show that they're growing because they have a bunch of roles open and you want to hire for them. Some of them have those, what are they called, greenfield roles or whatever, evergreen roles, where they just constantly have a role open forever.
Yep.
You guys can probably, you on there, you see the same CISO role advertised for a year. There's 5,000 applicants. Nobody ever gets a call. They're not really hiring for these roles. They're trying to show that to their investors or board, hey, we're trying to do the right thing. We have the roles open, but they don't actually want to fund them or hire these people to begin with. So we're seeing the disconnect between the data and kind of real life experience, what we're seeing. And then, not to get too deep into it here, but in Ira's blog post, I mean, this was great. He actually analyzed the data that ISC2 is shown in the report saying we have this gap. And he's actually saying, hey, look, you guys misrepresented the data, which I think would be an interesting conversation for the rest of us to have here, because to his point, they did. The fact that the data is showing that, if you want to secure all the things properly, we need X amount of millions of people to do it. Nowhere in that data does it say people are actually hiring for these jobs or companies actually want to do this. And he pointed out there's a tiny disclaimer and font size 2 at the bottom that actually says this in their own report. And so he's kind of taken them to task saying, hey, look, you guys misrepresented the data. And now, startup founders, VCs, everyone and their mom is running with this data to justify, questionable investments, I guess. And so from there, I mean, this is a fun topic, I think, to kick around here.
Lee, I'm gonna ask you this because you've been recruiting for a while. Talk to me about what it's like getting open roles that you're gonna then try to bring people in for, because you're the direct intermediary, right? You're the one going out and looking for this talent. Do you see this massive amount of open roles? Are they out there? Are they actually hiring?
Well, I mean, I would tell you this, is that if a company is out there, there's a difference between a company posting a role that's open and engaging to actually search for a position. So, when something is just posted on either a job board or on LinkedIn or just some corporate website, sometimes it's real and sometimes it's not. I mean, sometimes it's just the sake of an internal posting, waiting for internal people to apply. Maybe they've already identified a transfer or something like that. But in my world, the world that I lived in, we were a retained search firm, right? So when companies, they would pay us money in order to seek and find people, right? So before we would even get on the phone to start contacting people or engaging the market, they would pay for us. So we knew they were serious. It was part of the reason that we shifted our model, because we had a lot of fishing expeditions where people say, oh, we want to hire 20 people. We might win this contract. And then they wouldn't win the contract. And then it was done, right? So we just wound up shifting that model. What's happening here is that I do agree there's a lot of what Erik is saying where people are aspirationally looking for talent, or that they're casting a net out there, but they might not be executing. So that's one. Number two is that a lot of these jobs are multiple listed. So it's the same job over and over and over again. So when you see most of the contingent recruiters that are out there, they're companies saying, look, I'll go out to 7 or 8 of them. They'll post a job, and then recruiters are doing, generally speaking, are racing to actually put a resume into an ATS so that they're getting credit for it. So it's not the same kind of service that we provided, right? So what you see is that, or you might see the same job that's listed in 6 different locations, but it's really only one job. So I think that there's just, all these because it's become less of a focused net, right? These job postings are very, very broad nets, and really have no control. There's really nobody saying that a search has to be run a certain way, or we have to go to the market a certain way. We'll just collect as many resumes and then we'll figure out down the road. And in fairness, a lot of these internal programs are overtasked. So that's why when they have 500 applicants, it's a black hole. There's false positives, there's false negatives. I used to tell our clients, and say, like, you don't pay me for the people we send in, you pay us for the people who we don't send in. So you're paying us essentially for not wasting your time. And I think that when you start dealing with keywords, or you hear the term CISO, tons of people are, oh, I could be a CISO, or I could be a security engineer, or I could be a IR-L3, or whatever that is, right? And the truth is that so many different organizations define those terms differently that, people think they are, but they really aren't what the companies truly need. Is that helpful?
You get a lot of people too, right? You see everybody coaching people how to get into security, and it's, listen, if you meet like one of the 20 things, like, go ahead and apply. We're telling people to do that. The number thing is interesting. I'm curious about the perpetual job postings out there, right? Like, we've got it out there, but we really don't necessarily have an intent to fill it. To me, the first thing that comes to mind is this some sort of like, I don't want to say scapegoat, but scapegoat in the event, like, oh, we had an incident and we can go back and show, like, look, we've had these jobs open, we can't fill them, even though we weren't trying to fill them. Like, is that like a notch in that bucket to be able to say, hey, look, we're understaffed. Of course we had an incident, because I saw something, and I don't have the statistic around it, talking about, like, a lot of this is because they're blaming a lot of incidents, right? Is because we don't have the staff in-house to be able to handle things. So does that just become kind of that buffer to be able to say, oh, yeah, we got popped, but oh, look, we've been trying for 3 years, even though we're not really trying?
There are all sorts of degrees of trying, right? And I think that, I think a lot of times, like, and when I used to really be deep into the space and working, you would go out and do a search, and what would happen was that if you talk to 5 different people who the search touched, development, IT, whoever's going to touch it, risk, compliance, they would have a much different opinion of what that person would look like. So the ability to kind of build consensus is very difficult unless you have a referee or a tour guide in that process, right? So, that's really hard if you're not educated, right? Security, this is one of the reasons that people have a hard time with security. It's because everybody wants something from security, and everybody interprets security as something different, what that means to them. It could be, well, security is necessary so we can sign this contract. Security is necessary so we don't get breached. Security is necessary so I could sign off on a SOC 2. There's so many different reasons why security is important, and everybody has their own motivation. So we've taken this super technical profession and we've tried to make security engineers Uber negotiators. And you've tried to just keep adding more and more skill on top of, something that's just hard anyway. And now we're trying to just make it more and more complex, so people appear to be qualified, but they're really not what, the person buying is not the same thing as the person selling, and there's a huge gap in between.
That's a really good point. Like, you can see companies today, because they know it's an employer's market, they're kind of unicorn hunting. They know they have the job that everybody wants. There's a lot of people in the market, so they're taking their time. At the same time, like, to Lee's point, like, I've talked to probably 100 different companies about kind of what they're looking for. Every single one of them is different. Somebody wants a CISO that can be customer facing and PR friendly, right? Some of them want somebody that can drive embedded systems because they're making hardware. Sometimes they want a CISO that can be talk to the board really well. Sometimes they want hands-on technical CISOs, because there's no kind of like defined run book of what a CISO looks like. Again, to Lee's point, depending on who you talk to, will kind of dictate on what it is you're looking for. Compared to other C-suite positions where, if you're going for a chief revenue officer, what you want them to do, especially different scales of your company. If you want somebody that's, your CFO, what they want them to look like at different stages of your company. CISOs don't have that.
I have a story. I have a story to match this. When I lived in Chicago, there was a job open in a downtown Chicago company that over the course of 3 years, 4 different recruiting firms called me and asked me to apply for. It was a security architect position. I interviewed for the role the first year it was open, and I interviewed for the role the third year that it was open. And both times it was different. The first time I came in and they asked me some generic architecture questions, like high-level security questions. And then they asked me to write some SQL code. And I was like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Like that, I'm not a DBA. Like, well, we expect a security architect to be able to write SQL code and some C#. I was like, no, that's a developer. Like that's different. And so I was like, I'm not a fit for this, clearly. And the second time I came in, I was like, maybe things have changed. And they had. Because at that point, they were looking at somebody who knows how to build Linux machines. Also not a security architect, right? So, and these are, I want to say at least 4 different recruiting firms in the Chicagoland area. 2 that everybody's heard of, and then 2 boutique ones. And it was bonkers. Like, and I never saw the role close. It was just ad infinitum. It was there forever. And everybody you talk to, you'd be like, oh yeah, I've tried that role too. Like, what the hell? What are they doing? And you think that years later it changed. It hasn't.
I was going to say, like, through my last year here since I left the last year, there's been 2 roles that I've actually interviewed for twice at the same company. Because the recruiters that were there had left, new recruiters came in, and they pinged me again about the same role. Their ATS system hadn't tracked, they'd already talked to me. I went through. Some of the people even remembered me, right? But what they were asking me in these different interviews, completely different, even though it was for the same role at these 2 different companies. I mean, it's bonkers. It's a complete crapshoot right now. And it's more, it comes down to, is what I've seen, more of kind of a popularity contest. Like, did you connect with the person in the interview? Did they like you? Did you like them to laugh? Versus what actual skills or experiences do you have? And that's kind of what I'm seeing it's coming down to.
I will tell you in my experiences that, and I've been stunned by how many companies don't really know what they want, but they seem so confident in it. And then the part you're mentioning, Eric, about like maybe who you know and do they like you, that's what happens when you fall back on not having a definition. You're like, oh, they're a good cultural fit and they're funny and I like them and they live close by, as opposed to they have the necessary skills or the necessary wherewithal, because you really don't know how to ask that question. And I'll tell a little quick story. Is I remember being interviewed for a senior chief risk officer, basically. And there were, I'll just say right now, as recruiters, I don't think they were internal, I think they were external. And they kept asking me over and over and over again to explain what risk was. And it's like, I tried going through every sort of risk module concept, every framework that's out there. And I said, there's like 70 frameworks I can walk through with you if you'd like me to, and they just kept asking me the same question. I'm like, I'm not entirely sure you really know what you're asking, because I'm giving you every answer that's possible, which isn't actually the right thing for me to be doing, But I think it really is absolutely critical. I think for one is, Eric, I have a question for you, and Lee, I'm going to have to ask for you to kind of just open it up. But Eric, the question I have for you is in your views earlier about outsourcing security, right? So we saw this with IT pretty big, right? So I'm wondering if we're experiencing security, and is the net a growth in security capability and demand for that just in the United States? We're seeing it compress because it's moving offshore. That's a question for you, Eric. And for you, Lee, I'm very interested in, do you believe this is an echo or an impact as a result of the massive changes we've seen in recruiting activity, because it's become a massive business, huge consolidation, its own market, and the use of AI. So I see friends getting filtered out immediately and getting like form emails in 2 seconds. So anyway, over to you, Eric. I'm very curious about what you think about the flex internationally.
Well, I mean, it's been going on for a minute. And even when I was back at Salesforce back in 2017, 2018, we'd already kind of begun that cycle of moving things from the States and Europe to cheaper locations. I mean, especially at scale, when they're able to push it, someplace else overseas. And what I've seen from an operator point of view is, I mean, it's pretty obvious. The retention of these people that you're hiring overseas is lower. the quality of work you get is lower. You have to put more time and effort into managing these people from the States because they're keeping the leadership in the States. They're moving the function someplace else. Again, India, the Philippines, I've seen some Vietnam, Brazil. There's all these different
Ireland,
places.
Costa Rica, they're all growing huge capabilities
you're
right now.
saving money, right? But you're increasing the workload on your people. You're getting a lower quality of product. At the same time, if you're a CISO, or not a CISO, if you're a CTO or a CFO or a CEO, all you're looking at is, did we check the box? Do we have our SOC 2 so we can keep doing business? Yes. Can I keep on cutting costs and still check that box? Yes, right? Because those people aren't, versed in security. They really don't give a crap about the quality. As long as they can keep the business can continue running, they can keep fulfilling their legal obligations under their contracts, through the regulations, whatever it is, they can keep on checking those boxes. The people on the board and the CEO, that's their concern. So if they can outsource it for half the price or 3/4 the price, whatever it is, if they can shave a few bucks off of the headcount, because in security, that's your number one cost, right? It's 50 to 60% of your budget is people. If they can shave that off any way possible and still check the boxes, they're going to. And we've been seeing it for the last 10 years, and it's gotten to the point now where those overseas locations, is what I'm hearing, they're not as cheap as they used to be. And I think as the prices go up and the quality continues to be questionable, people are already starting to reel that back in. Hence why, not to make India an example of this, but the costs have gone up significantly to the point where there are startups now in the States hiring people, Mexico, Canada, I've seen in Puerto Rico, Cuba, all over the place. They're finding places where they can get quality work in similar time zones for still less money without placing it here in the States. And so, it's kind of that whole cycle. We used to outsource things to China all the time, right? Now we're starting to bring other places because the cost of doing business in China has increased. We're seeing the same thing in India. But the outsourcing of kind of security, especially operational teams, I only see that continuing. Unless we can come up with a way to actually prove our value and show quality and show the business outcomes we're delivering, and be able to prove with data that, hey, look, local people do it better than outsourced or offshore people, we're just going to see it continue. My 2 cents.
I think I'm on mute. There we go. Look, so I think you've hit on something pretty important that I think needs to be talked about, because what happens in security, right, is that you have this flow because you have such an evolving industry with evolving technology. Different skills become super valuable, and then they become less valuable along the way, right? So you could be really great at, cloud or identity or AppSec or whatever, or infrastructure or whatever it might be, right? And then after that problem goes away, right, a company, they'll hire you to really scratch that itch, right? They'll say, wow, we really have this problem. We have nobody in-house who could do it. We have to go out and pay 1.5x what we're paying for our other people. Let's figure it out and do it. Then the person comes in, they do their trick. Then they say, wait 1 second, this person's earning way too much money. We don't have that problem anymore. They're not really a manager. They don't have those kinds of skills. We don't see them as a part of an organization, so we're going to let them go, right? And then, so you see, what happens is that because technology changes, because we've become an industry of specialists, right? Because there are 400 certifications, because everybody defines their issues differently, right? And the underlying factor is what Erik said, is that companies are not in the business of security, right? Unless you are a product or a service vendor, right? If you're, I live in Princeton, so I'm right by all the pharmaceuticals, right? None of these companies really want to have security people on their books, right? They need an executive, they need some directors, they need to understand the business risks in their countries, but they don't need to have 100, 200 operational people, because those people aren't building more drugs, they're not researching more drugs, and they're not selling more drugs, right? So ideally, what they would rather do is they would rather outsource those operational tasks either to third-party providers or to 1099s that they could rely upon, because they don't want to have to pay benefits. They don't want to have to pay the total cost of employee. They don't want to do all those kinds of things, right? Now, so that's how a company would look at it. And like to Erik's point, if I could get it cheaper overseas and the delta doesn't matter, well, I'll go overseas and get it, and that'll be fine, and I'll figure out how to do it. Or from a practitioner's perspective, right? Okay, I'm an application expert. I'm a cloud expert. I'm doing great at this. I really know this stuff. Wow, they'll pay me more than I'm probably worth, right? Then I go do that work, right? But then I'm done, right? Like, but I know I have to go work at Johnson & Johnson, Bristol Myers Squibb, Novo Nordisk, whichever the pharmaceutical of choice around here. But I don't have a career there. They're not interested in investing in my career. They want me to scratch their itch, right? So that candidate now is stuck in a place where there's not a lot of that professional stuff, in a place where there's not a lot of upward mobility. Their one-trick pony is not a trick anybody wants to see, and it's a very expensive trick to perform. But the issue is that there's another company that needs that trick, right? So if you run out of companies that need that trick, or we make it so you have to be on site, or we make it so that, you know, you have to live in a certain country, or that you have to know a specific technology, right? You can know GCP, or you can know Azure, you can know what, if it's the wrong thing, then that person is struggling to replace their income, right? Because they're in a place where, you know, when you go work at one of these pharmaceutical companies, and I'm not picking on them, this could be a bank or anything like that, right? When I go work at a pharmaceutical company and I come out of an MBA program, and then they put me through a leadership training program, they're teaching me what it's like to work at Johnson & Johnson, right? So they will move me to Asia Pac. They will move me to a different view. They will move me to medical devices. They'll do something with me that I keep learning the business. So my value as an indoor cat is super important, right? But we don't have that in security, right? And I would tell you this, is that, you know, when you hear it, right, and this will change a little bit, right? So you have now all these experienced people, right, who have just lived through 5 to 8 years where they're super valuable, and that rug has now been pulled out from under them because they either haven't developed their skill, they've either jumped from company to company, right? You know, they've essentially worked a life as a contractor, although they've been employees. So you have this like real problem where that person is saying, wait, I'm super qualified and now nobody wants to dance with me, right? Like, and that's a thing that's happening, right? And then look, I'll say some things that I think, you know, will probably be really hard to hear, but like, and I've said it in other rooms when I've spoken, if you just look at our podcast, right? We're 5 white males, probably somewhere between 40 and 50 years old, right? If you look at the industry, right? Like, I mean, if you look at the industry, that is kind of like, you know, what the ethos and the genesis of the industry has been, which leads us here, right? So we're at this place, right, where companies generally, when they're looking to hire or they're looking to promote, they look at security and they'll say, well, we'd rather have more diversity in our group, right? We'd rather have, you know, and I'm all for diversity, so I'm not poo-pooing that. However, right, what's happening is that you have this logjam of like white male talent that wants to push up, right? But that place has been blocked, right? So you've created this huge bottleneck. It's a huge bottleneck, and it's a lot. This is like very third rail stuff, and maybe if I was still running a business, I might not be as free to talk about it. But I think that people really need to hear this, right? Is that, you know, I get called from CISOs that would ask me, they'd say, like, we want to hire, but we would appreciate we had a diverse candidate. And I said, oh, that makes sense. Like, I understand that. We can produce a diverse pool for you. I said, however, I want you to understand this. When you're looking for a job, and I tell you that the clients are looking and giving preference to diverse candidates, I just want to know, how are you going to feel about that response if you need a job. And then it was quiet, right? So and I'm not saying that we should not have an industry of diverse people, but what I'm saying is that you have a situation now where, you take a complicated subject with a lot of different stakeholders, then you layer in compensation ranges, you start layering in return to office location, and now I'll throw a diversity layer on top of it, which basically gives you essentially 15% of the workforce. You generally have problems that are so unsolvable, right? And my wife used to say, you would say like, look, Lee, if anybody really, like what you really do is you just solve human puzzles, right? And that's kind of like what we do, right? That's kind of what a really good recruiter will do. And a really good recruiter will be able to have this conversation with a customer when they're starting a search and they're saying, this is what it's going to look like. Are you ready to sign up for it or not? Because this is how the sausage is made if you want it fast and if you want it right. And I think a lot of people, they move away from that question, right? And I think a lot of time, what happens is that, we get so enamored with the people talking about, there's all these millions of jobs and, and there's so many openings and their certifications and their boot camps and their conferences and they're all this kind of thing, that this great industry that has arisen around talent, but nobody has ever stopped to really think about what happens to that talent. How does that talent continue to progress? How does that talent make good decisions, right? And like, which is why you get a lot of people who are, who struggle with mental health in our industry, right? For a high stress job with a lot of pressure, a lot of change. It's very difficult, this profession, but the passion that people have for it really becomes that, like, it's an X factor that I think is beautiful, but I think it's starting to get tarnished.
So this is the issue I had early 2000s when IT and cyber was rolled into this, started doing everything, all the low-level roles. They said, well, we can just outsource all these because these are low-level roles. And I always thought, wait a minute, you just fired your farm team. And in 5 years, you're going to say, well, why don't we have any mid-level talent? And the answer is because you fired them all. Like, where did you think they were going to come from? I can't believe our entire industry was so short-sighted like this. It's like, it was obvious.
Well, I mean, sorry.
I was going to say to Raz's point, like I've actually witnessed this where I've been at companies where I've come in and looked at my team, and some of these times these teams are very large, and I kind of compare it to like a sports team where you can have a really wide bench, but the experience just isn't there. So it's very shallow and wide, and this has been a kind of recurring theme because, again, to Raz's point, when you outsource so many jobs, you're not retaining any of that experience, any of that talent, and so there seems to be like kind of there's a whole bunch of people at the top for some reason, people that probably accelerated their careers and got to the top too quickly, who are lacking a bunch of skills and experience. And then there's a whole bunch of lower level people. And that mid-range is hard to find. It's gone. And to Raz's point, we kind of did it to ourselves.
Yeah, one of the things I was just thinking about, listening to what Lee was talking about, is we almost kind of break down, almost our industry into the builders and the maintainers type of thing, right? Like, what Lee was saying, you've got these people that have this specific expertise. There's an itch that the company needs scratched. I need somebody to come in and build the AppSec program. I need you to lay this all out and, get it up and running. But once it's done, like, all that expertise kind of goes out the window, right? Like, I don't need that as much anymore. Now I need somebody that can come in and make sure that the stuff we've implemented, is being done. I mean, yes, we've got some technical pieces. I mean, take GRC, take any of these. Like, you can bring somebody in that's not that expertise, knows all these different realms, how all these pieces fit. And now I can say, look, I could take somebody that maybe is less valuable from a pay perspective, right? Compensation, I can put somebody in there that can do this, but I had the high value over here. And I think that's where we kind of see that people that you're seeing struggling may be the ones more on that builder side. And once you've started, everybody's built that out. Now we're looking for kind of those, I don't say like busy bee maintainers of, okay, I am the SOC analyst, I am the, AppSec engineer, I am, the auditor, but, those aren't huge steps from I am the business analyst, I am the project manager, I am the XYZ, to be able to put that stuff in there. So I think it's an interesting call out there to kind of break that up.
Well, if I may build on that for a second, James, to really kind of play out your point is I could argue, and this is maybe rattling a cage a little bit, but I could argue some of the challenges we're seeing in security is because everybody loves to build stuff. Nobody really likes to paint the bridge. And I've always said that the real hard security work is happening in the trenches, in the day-to-day of the young men and women that are out there just pounding in front of keyboards every day that are making a fraction of what their leadership is making. That's where the real work is getting done. That's where the hard work is getting done. I'm not saying building programs isn't difficult, but that is building. That is not maintaining and pushing the ball forward down the field, right? And so I think what we see is a lot of people want to get into that, I could build it better, right? How many times you said, man, if I could do this, I would have done it completely different, right? So people want to move in there, and the security industry, because it's so been balloonish and gives all these kind of opportunities for people that are wanting to move up the ladder. You have people who did a little bit getting into the positions where they're telling other people what to do. And then you kind of have it a little bit top heavy or builder heavy, when in fact you need sometimes to get things done. And then what do you do with an industry that has difficulty demonstrating its value to the business and really kind of asks for a lot of money? And so the business goes, fine, you're gonna have to do it with less money or the same amount of money, do more. And the only way you can do that is outsource it to another country. So you see this sort of weird cyclic meaning that we kind of crushed into it all. But anyway.
Well, I think not just outsourced to another country. A lot of what we see being outsourced internally. I mean, how much stuff does an AppSec engineer do that a developer should be doing, that a QA should be doing? How much stuff that, a security engineer is doing could be done by somebody that's in the organization that's already doing 90% of that work, and you're offloading 10% to the security team, right? I mean, we're doing internal shoring, I guess, and there's a lot of gains that could be made there that help break that back down and say, listen, I don't need to do this. Like, you can go look at that alert. Like, we've tuned it down, we've fine-tuned it down. You're only getting the positives. You can take it from there and move forward, but we still see that disconnect.
Let's end on that one. That's a good one to end with. Go ahead, Lee.
Yeah, I mean, I think that look, obviously we probably could go on for quite some time on the topic. I don't think it's a 40-minute topic, but the one thing I would just say this is that, like, we have gotten as an industry, right? We've got there are two, I think, main problems that I think are general problems that I think a lot of that people can take away from this. Number one, we've become too rock star heavy, and we haven't appreciated the roadies. I think that whenever I see that Salesforce commercial, I chuckle because everybody has gotten enamored with being who's a rock star, but it is the person who, like, they are the lunch pail people who really know they might not do well in interviews. They might not be the person who's going to interface with the business well, but there's going to be somebody in the interview process that's going to ding them to say, well, they're not really great with communication or whatever. You know what though? They don't have to be great at everything to be super, super valuable. And we've gotten into a place where the person who is not like IQ, EQ, complete person is like non-valuable. And I think that's difficult. I think that's bad, right? And I think the second thing is that, we've also, we've started to, this narrative that exists on LinkedIn, which really kind of really gets under my skin, is that just because people are passionate and interested and because they went to some conferences, we should be giving them jobs. And quite frankly, people say, oh, there are no entry-level jobs in security. Okay, there probably aren't a ton. But I live 2 miles from the university here. I guarantee you every CS major at Princeton University has more than 5 to 10 job offers if they want it. And it's probably something in engineering or security. And you could say that at Georgia Tech, New York Poly, Cal Davis, Virginia Tech, Texas A&M, DePaul, you name it. So if you're out there and you're listening, you need to get technically astute. You can't just say, I showed up at a B-Sides, I got some T-shirts, I went to the hacking village, I picked some locks. It doesn't work that way. So really, if you can demonstrate hard skills, you can become valuable and people will appreciate you. So anyhow,
Can I play the flip side to this?
Please.
Because maybe it's not the flip side. Maybe it's the. So I see a lot of this where universities have started churning out security engineers, essentially, certificates, right? Those kinds of things. I think our industry, I think our space is closer to the way plumbers and tradesmen operate with the whole apprentice, model than the expertise model that is going and being a lawyer or a doctor. You can go study a bunch of books, study case law, take a bar exam, and you're a lawyer. If you do that in cyber, you're effing useless to me as an employer, because you know what the book says. Congratulations. What happens when something breaks? Do you have the skills to go, ooh, that's connected to that, and because this is happening, I've seen this before, then that means that. I need to go look here. You end up these we used to joke about them, the paper MCSE. Remember MCSEs back in the day? There would be hundreds of people with MCSEs applying. I used to, like, when I was at a job in the city in Chicago, I probably hired and fired 3 or 5 of them in the span of a year, because like, oh wow, you got MCSE, you got and whatever, all these Microsoft certifications. I go, all right, now go build me a server that has these and these requirements, and I need you to do this and this. And they'd be like, well, that's not in the manual. I'm like, you just figure it out. No idea. No skill, anything beyond what the book says. And that's the whole problem I had, to circle this all the way back to the ISE squared, is, you got young kids that can read the book, study really well, and you're a good test taker. Boom, you're an MCSE. Boom, you're a CISP. And you've got, what is it, Jim? 400,000, whatever it is, some odd certs that are out there. I see people with like 9 or 10 certifications behind their name, and I go, that's awesome. You're good at test taking. Guess what? I've taken the only cert that I've ever taken is the Checkpoint Certified Security. I was Checkpoint Certified Security Administrator for a while, and a couple other minor ones. But like, all of my learnings have been in the school of hard knocks. Like, you throw me in the trenches, I know how to fix things. I've learned, because I was a help desk engineer. Somebody said at the help desk, I was the world's worst developer for like 5 minutes. I did build servers. I did then go try to work on routers and switches and understand basic networking, so that I know as a security person, when somebody says this is happening, my brain goes, I bet it's because this and this and this thing that's completely unrelated to what's in the security books, but it's this is a cause and effect relationship. Sorry, that's a rant, but I mean, that's where my head's at. I think in response to there are 10 billion open jobs, we've created an industry where we're selling certifications to people who are never going to be able to get that job. So we're preying on people that are already looking for work and needing it, to which I say twice, right? Because now you're the worst of the worst. And as a double, because of this perceived massive hole in our hiring, this talent gap, universities are churning out equally, I'll say, experienced, challenged people that can read a book and take a test. That does not make a security person. Sorry.
I think you are onto something, right? There's a difference between somebody who's been, like you talk about, working at help desk, or like a CS major, right? Or the kind of like technical rigor through a course of study that you might get with then a co-op program and some internships, or working at the school computer lab, right? Like, there are all sorts of things that you can do that you don't have to be as thorough as you were, Ralph, but like, there is that level of, but when people start saying, I don't need to be technical, right? Oh, I took all these policy classes. guess what? You and the rest of the world, right? Like policy is something that happens after you start really understanding how things work, right? It's an evolution, right? It's an evolution of understanding how really security works from an architectural perspective and being able to tie it to governance and risk and those kinds of things. So I know we could go forever, but like there is a happy medium. The world doesn't owe the graduates anything. The graduates have to make it impossible not to hire them by getting the right skills, investing in the right things in themselves. And at that point in time, they'll have plenty of options because I'm sure a lot of people will want to go out and hire them.
Am I crazy to think that we've been hiring wrong and we should really look at the trades and the way the trades hire and look at the apprenticeship model, right? You start off as an apprentice to somebody, you do your time, then you go take a practical exam that says, hey, over the last 2 years, I've learned some things. And now you've got a base certification. Now you can go do some things on your own, but not everything because you're not there yet. And you work another couple of years and you take another practical exam that says, okay, now I'm now a second level, third level. Like, I think that's the only way not to continue to screw this up. You guys, am I crazy?
I think for that to happen, there would have to be some type of accepted, best practices or frameworks around how we do our jobs, how we measure success in security, which is a whole other topic, right? Like when you say my security department's successful, what does that mean? Like you haven't been hacked in the last year? Does that mean you're actually delivering business outcomes where you're accelerating growth? I mean, there's no definition around what success is. Hence, there's no framework or benchmarks or standards around how we should be doing our jobs so we can actually measure ourselves. What's the measuring stick we want to use to actually, to your point, Raph, like if we did the trade model thing where how do you move from one level to another? What does success actually look like? What does growth look like? We're missing that to begin with, right? Which is why we're kind of in this boat to begin with. While this is why executives, CEOs, boards are slashing budgets, why they are outsourcing things, because we can articulate success to begin with.
Yeah. So
that's
James,
one other podcast.
That's we'll do that next. But just to close off, because we're almost at an hour here, and I want to end at some point. James, you had said that how much of the security workforce, right, the open jobs that could be out there are being subsumed, if I'm paraphrasing properly, into the parts of the business, like an AppSec engineer going and just becoming an applications person that learns security. How much of as our trade, because it's a trade, as our trade evolves, how much of the things that we used to hoard, like used to be us, are now breaking off and going back into the disciplines, into networking, into application development, into systems design that aren't us anymore, but that are us, but not us?
I would say not enough. I think, I say it all the time, right? When security started out, security was like, I want to gobble everything up. Everything's security. I want to own it. Don't worry about anything. If it starts with an S, I've got it. And then we kind of started realizing like, oh, well, we don't have it. We can't do all that. We don't have enough people. We don't have enough time. Like we need to shift that out. I mean, think about the job descriptions for AppSec engineers, right? You're a trainer, you're all these different things. You're a code reviewer, you're a pen tester, you're like all these things. Like, okay, but threat modeling, like you're expected to do all this stuff. And yet when you really break it down, I mean, for the most part, most of the pen testing could be done by the QA team. Like security testing can be done by QA. They're already doing testing. The business analysts, the developers can sit there and do most of threat modeling. You're really there just to provide a little extra piece. And I'm a huge awareness guy. Once you know of something, you remember it. So if I told you about a risk, there's a good chance next time you're going to probably think about that risk. Like all these pieces that, okay, we pulled over, maybe we can push some of that back. I think there's a lot of work that can be done there. I think there's still a lot of way to go, but I do think that kind of limits down still, right? So now you become that specialist that if I'm an AppSec engineer, like I have a specialty, but it's not training the developers. It's not doing these other pieces. It's look, I'm going to get deep into what's the root cause of this issue. I'm going to help guide those answers, like you're like a true technical specialist of what you're trying to do, not just sitting there of, I mean, how many AppSec engineers, and I do AppSec, so that's why I pick on it, right? How many AppSec engineers go and take the finding from the tool and put the finding in the Jira or in the ADO or wherever it's going.
They're the guy
Like you're
from Office
shuffling,
Space.
Yep.
right? Like you're shuffling stuff back and forth. You're not much more than a business analyst in most cases, right?
If
Like
that.
how do you get back to, okay, how do I get out of this so I can get back to the specialty of, okay, I'm an AppSec engineer. Like I know the security of .NET inside and out. Developers have a question, I can help to, put them in the right direction. I know if I see this vulnerability where it's actually a risk, but that's where we got to get to with that. But we have to, shift out a bunch of that other stuff that we shouldn't be spending time with, right? That we should realize should go back to where it was.
Well, this feels like a good place to end this. I want to go before we conclude. I want to go around, and I just one simple question, and maybe a 5-second, 10-second answer. So what? Right? We've had this is a good conversation. I think this aired a whole bunch of dirty laundry that our trade has. But so what? What do we do? What's next? What should we be thinking about? What are those of us that can make these changes or can do something about it? What do they do? Erik, you first.
At this stage of my career, I've kind of like just thrown up my hands and said, crap, I can't fix or change it. All I can do is share my experiences. And so all the time, you guys might have this too, I get hit up by people wanting to get into cybersecurity, either pivoting from a different role or coming out of college or whatever it is. And the first thing I tell them is like, are you sure? Like, double think this, dude. And I try to kind of open the kimono and say, look, this is a hard job. It's a thankless job. It's the highest burnout rate, lowest job satisfaction. The pay is going down. The jobs are decreasing. Like, is this really what you want to do? Like, so I really ask that question. And I actually advise people, like, if you're coming out of school with a computer science degree, a bachelor's or a master's, like, there's a lot of things you can do. You have that base level of experience. You have all kinds of avenues to explore. Like, have you explored them all? Or is security really the thing you want to get into? So from where I sit, again, kind of the tail end of my career here in my mid-50s somehow, like all I can do is share my experiences and kind of tell people that want to get the market, try to inform them as much as I can so they can make an informed decision. And again, like if my kids were of age and they want to go into security, I'd probably advise them against it, honestly.
Wow. All right, Lee.
I mean, I think that the thing that people can do until something becomes super actionable, I think the thing that people can do is a little bit maybe about what brought us together, is to call out some of the stuff that's out there that's just factually inaccurate. I think that there's so many people who have made their, I guess, mark, brand, whatever you want to call it, being these influencers, right? And they're not saying anything that is really valuable, and it's so misleading, which is really like, for me, like the last 2 or 3 years, I've kind of been like just on the sidelines, and watching this, it just has really drawn my ire to say, like, how many young people are hearing this stuff, or how many mid-career people who are struggling to find a job and they've been told the wrong things, right? And they feel bad and they feel lousy and things are like, I just feel that people they've been getting things that they want to hear, not things that they need to hear. And I think that like, that's something I've throughout my career, I've tried to be someone who's been willing to cut through things, even if they were unpopular. To try to give people true insight what was happening, behind the curtain. That's kind of why, like when I started some blogging and some podcasting and some conference speaking, I wanted the practitioners to know what was happening. And I think that is, it's one of the reasons I'd like to come on this podcast, because people have to know that everything that they're reading and hearing, they really have to consider their sources, and they really have to, I hate to say that they have to be skeptical, but like, so what could we do? We could be vocal and honest and candid so that people can actually make good decisions for themselves, and we could be visible. That's what I think. That's my personal.
Jim, thank you, Lee. Jim, over to you.
All right, I think maybe this ties some of this together a little bit. I believe it falls into the mentorship and professional development category, and the commitment by those gray hairs like us, and a little bit to your point, Eric and Lee, and even Raph, what you said about, the journeyman journey is, I think we need to create an environment where people can make mistakes and grow and learn a lot of different things. And so that they can get more in depth into the sort of like the art of cybersecurity. And what's happening is, I remember when we were first doing security, you had to like figure it out. There was no, you had to figure it out. And so I think what happens is we have a lot of free training and everybody's throwing certificates around and certifications, and then you can say all the right words and then you're put in front of a computer and you can't make anything happen. So it creates this sort of byproduct image of downward spiral. So I think is if we really emphasize mentorship and development. So for example, imagine somebody started a company and they signed let's say if this was even possible, they signed a contract that they're going to stay at the company for 3 years. We take care of you. We'll put you on this path. We'll develop you and we'll mentor you and we'll help develop your career. But to the points I think Lee made, especially you, Eric, and even Raph around the journey, it's all really critical. We have to get back to being a community that's helping us move things forward and not repeating something that you heard 20 years ago on a LinkedIn post as an influencer kind of thing.
I like it. That's good. James had the role, but that's good. You guys, this has been fun. But more importantly, I feel like this has been a little bit therapeutic because I feel like I've been taking crazy pills the last, couple of years because maybe it's because I've been on this hamster wheel a couple of times. So I've seen, we've done this, right? But good Lord, like, churning out more paper certified geniuses and putting them in real situations doesn't end well. It doesn't. I've seen it. I've done it. We've watched it around us. And trying it now again isn't going to be magically different. That's a definition of insanity. So, look, we've got a lot of strong opinions. I'm curious if anybody's got something wants to counter us, right? You've got a different opinion, dissenting opinion. Hell, ISC squared folks, if you're listening, love to hear you, give you free airtime on the pod. Come out and let's talk about that report. Let's talk about Ira's post. Let's talk about what we're doing for this industry and how you guys are making it better. Defend your position, right? And I think this is a good start. I think more conversations need to happen. I'm going to stand by the apprenticeship model. I think that's the only way this is going to turn into anything good. But I think we're probably 2 or 3 decades away from that because we're not mature enough to know what the hell that means, right? We're not. It's going to be a while. So, all right, Lee, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you and giving us some time. Eric, always good time to have you aboard. You're a snarkopotamus. It's awesome. James had the role, but Jim, always good to have you aboard, sir, as a now permanent co-host of the podcast. And I will get that audio fixed, I promise. Next time my kids have a few minutes. But all right, you guys, thanks for listening. If you have opinions, if you have dissent, whatever, get in the LinkedIn group, post in there. Let's hear what you think. Check us out on YouTube because that's where this video is posted, and you get a little extra context for what's going on in these shows when you watch the video. So for the Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast, this is Raph signing us off. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you guys another time, another place on another Down the Security